Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Simon Siddol. Before I bring him on, I have to thank our sponsors, CuriosityStream, which is the award-winning destination for documentary series and features. CuriosityStream delivers shows across the full spectrum of the nonfiction genre to demystify science, nature, history, technology, society, lifestyle, and much more. Satisfy your thirst for knowledge anytime and anywhere with CuriosityStream. Just click the link in the description to start your subscription today. They start at only $2.99 a month. And I want to thank C60 Purple Power. I know you hear me every show talking about how great C60 is. Well, for me, it really is, and you need to check it out for yourself. Take back control of your health. Visit c60purplepower.com/knowledge10. Use coupon code knowledge10, or just click the link in the description to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. And if you're ready to go the full extra mile for yourself, your health, and spiritual well-being, check out Karen Holton. She offers not only health and wellness coaching, but the best quality organized zendomes, crystals, and much more. Just visit her website by clicking the link in the description, and tune in next Sunday to her YouTube channel for a new episode of Forbidden Transformation. It's a live interactive show which I co-host with her. Tonight, I want to welcome Simon Siddol. After decades of teaching music one-on-one using consciousness-raising techniques and shamanic perspectives, he set himself the mission of waking the Western world up to the black magic and social engineering being currently peddled as music, specifically to start a new aesthetic of wholesome, life-affirming, energetically aware musicianship. He believes the time is now or never for musicians to take up their shamanic powers and responsibilities. Simon, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to it. I myself am a musician. I started playing guitar at the age of 10, singing. I was playing in rock bands, writing original music, which I occasionally still do. And I've always I've always preferred the more unknown alternative music that you don't hear in the mainstream, because mainstream music to me, it never really got me. It never gave me that emotional response that I always got from the music I liked. And I notice now it's even worse. I can't even turn on the radio most of the time without hearing something that's just awful. But I've also personally experienced profound effects from music. Not only the way it affects a person's mood or happiness, I've experienced healing effects. And your research uncovers not only that the mainstream music has been essentially weaponizing our music through the modern music industry, but they've been doing this since ancient civilizations. And you've also researched and practiced healthy, positive, or conscious music and the profound effects that it has on us. First, I'd like to start with what got you started into looking into the poisonous music and then its solutions.
Okay, well, the poisonous element of the music is something that I think we've all felt somewhere inside ourselves for most of our lives. We've lived, if we live in the Western world, we've lived with poisonous music for a long time. We hear it every time we go in a shop. It's more about becoming aware of what's going on with it rather than merely feeling it. And this is what I've been trying to do with my career. I've been a teacher. I was somewhat of a musical prodigy when I was a child, and I went through various stages of wanting to be a concert musician and then a composer and an improviser. And actually after college, the one thing that connected and gave me any kind of support was being a teacher. So I started teaching piano. And I'd always had from teenage years an interest in, well, I don't think people called it a cult very much back then, but it was consciousness studies of all sorts. And I was always interested in the music that did actually really affect you that way. I remember the very first time I heard tube and throat singing. Have you ever heard tube and throat singing?
I've heard of it, yes, I have.
To hear it live is to have your brain waves altered almost instantaneously. So experiences like that and experiences of hearing music in churches with, beautiful proportions built into the distances of the walls to produce harmony. Things like this can sensitize us to a degree inside music, sensitize us to a level inside music that you are almost never going to get by putting a pair of headphones on and listening to something that's been recorded and crushed down into an MP3. Let me just track back on that for a second. What I was trying to tell you why I'm interested in these two things together and the poisonous element of it. The poisonous element of it comes because even as a teenager, I was trying to write music that affected people positively. I've had a few experiences of it like that, and I got a buzz off it, just knowing that I had this power to be able to just play sounds and to alter people's moods. But then when I got out into the big wide world after university, I noticed that a lot of people actually prefer to listen to music that has energetically kind of degraded or degrading qualities inside it. And living where I did, in the places I did in the north of England, it wasn't difficult to see a parallel between the way people treated music and treated themselves through music like this and the way they treated drugs. People who have been through traumas, for instance, are much more ready to put themselves through drug experiences where they come out the other end of it decidedly unhealthier than they went in. I'm not an anti-drugs crusader at all. I've been a psychonaut in my life, but I also have seen people rip themselves apart looking for a very specific flavor of happiness or bliss or relief that actually ruins the rest of their life while they're doing it. And I've begun to feel music doing the same thing to people. And I've come to the strong belief now that we have been culturally trained to gravitate towards this sort of music. We've had so much of it poured in our ears that to the average person that doesn't have the adventurousness like you to go and listen to music that has intriguingly different qualities in it, to people who just fall into the mainstream rut, well, that mainstream rut has got all sorts of toxic things going on inside it. And having been just a one-on-one teacher of people for a long time, I came to the conclusion that it's time I got out there and told people what I know about the qualities of what is toxic in music and what we can do about it.
Very good. Now, based on your research, how far back does the manipulation of music, as far as the changing of a music in a way to where it affects us negatively, how far back would you say that even goes?
Well, I must admit that a lot of what I'm talking about here is speculation and it is intuition of what's going on. But I do know for a fact that the cult of Dionysus has existed for thousands of years, and part of the rituals of the cult of Dionysus are wine and song. So I know from various different people that I've studied through my life, I've been a big fan of Michael Sarion's work. I don't know whether you know him. He talks a lot about ancient cults. And through his research and through others, I've learned that even back then, there were people using music as an element of magic, an element of mind-changing technology. Plus, you can also be seen in, let me just find this quote for a second for you here. It's, there's a quote from Plato, and off the top of my head, I can't honestly remember how old Plato is, but he is thousands of years back. And Plato had some big opinions about the nature of music. And one of those opinions about the nature of music, I'll perhaps find that quote later, I can just paraphrase it for you. His opinion was that if you change the very scale, the mode, as he called it at the time, if you change the very scale of the music that you played in a province, in a city, in a land, it would irrevocably alter the entire psyche of the people of that land. And as such, he suggested it be completely forbidden to do so. That's how much he thought that simply the tonal degrees of a scalic step can actually alter entire civilization psyches. As far as more recently is concerned, I have a theory that there was a high point in Western, in European art music about the death of Beethoven, which is 1826, I think, where there was an awful lot going on at that time to do with the elevation of man. There were a lot of Apollonian thinkers around. If you know the difference between Dionysian and Apollonian, Apollonian is art and music that seeks to enlighten the mind rather than drive the body. Yeah.
Right.
I get the feeling from what I've been studying that from that point onwards, which is actually the point where finally classical art musicians were removed around Beethoven's generation, they were removed from the yoke of simply being the servant of an upper class. Yeah? And they became their own businessmen. They could, sell their own concerts for the first time. And I have the feeling that that is the moment where the upper classes suddenly realized that they had somewhat, to some degree, lost control of that art-making facility and what it did to their civilization. And they had to start working in other ways to make it, to form it the way that they wanted and not what anybody else wanted. And I think one of the things that they did at this time was to start to thoroughly infiltrate both the press and academia in terms of what was going to be promoted in music and what was going to be left behind.
Very interesting. Now, what would you say is a way that they would use to, I guess, essentially poison the music or lower the vibrational frequency of a human through the manipulation of scales in music? How would they go about doing that?
Okay, let me try and give you a simple example of it. If you compare most Western music to most Middle Eastern...
Sorry, you were breaking up there. Can you repeat that? You were breaking up for a second.
You can hear me clearly now?
Yes.
Okay. Just to give you one difference in mode and how it alters things. The difference between most Western scales and Middle Eastern scales is the very first step up from the root note to the second note in the scale. In almost all Western scales, that's a tone. But in almost all Arabic scales, it's either a semitone or a quarter tone or a three-quarter tone, but it's lower than a European would expect. And the very moment that you encounter that inside a scale at the start of a piece, it can radically alter your sense of what the mood of this piece is going to do. Because if your very first step is smaller than you expected, well, that is suggesting to the mind introversion, is it not?
Right.
It's in the relationships between notes of a scale that give you, if you like, an emotional commentary of where the energies in a piece of music is going. And if that very first step is small and reserved, then it says a lot about what's coming in the rest of the piece of music most of the time, yeah?
That's very interesting. Now, moving a little bit further into the modern era, I don't know if your research has delved into some of the culture creation that was going on during the 60s and 70s with LSD and the music industry, how they, were attempting to basically alter the consciousness of the world at the time. Have you done any research into that?
I have absolutely, and that was actually the final straw that broke the camel's back that made me look at much earlier music to try and find the same kind of influence going on, because as far as my historical understanding of the world goes, population control did not start in the 60s. It started a lot earlier than that, so I don't see any reason why music wouldn't have been a target for such things earlier. I personally feel that the very instigation of the recording industry was, in a way, yes, okay, in other ways it was just technology, but in one way, it was a psyop in itself. It was going to turn what had been an ephemeral and passing, and because of those things, cherished art form that you needed a human being in front of you to present to you. It was turning it into a commodity. Now that's a powerful bit of magic going on there. And that was going on in the 20s and the 30s.
Simon, you there?
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah, you broke up for about a few seconds there. You said in the 20s and 30s, and that's the last I heard.
The control was already on its way in the 20s and 30s because, well, how long after the instigation of the recording industry was it populated at the management level by sharks? People who were going to make decisions that were rarely in the favor of the musicians, but in the favor of business, and who does business answer to? If you know your secret societies and your connections in the world, you know that business just doesn't stand by itself just looking for profit. It has deeper motives. And business was there right from the start doing this.
Now, what about the integration of LSD and or other psychoactive drugs along with their attempts to infiltrate the music?
Well, I personally believe that they were really just looking for a way in the 60s, if you're talking about, and
Right, yeah.
the Californian stuff that went on. I think they were simply looking for a way with the drugs to blow people's minds wide open, so that when they actually programmed them with music, with images, with dance, with whatever else they were throwing at them at the time, it would have much more dramatic and recordable effects than it would if they were simply high on a bit of 60s weed. So they passed it around just to see what would happen. I think they were vastly experimenting at the time because they saw that the mood of the time allowed it, that people wanted that breaking free. The 50s apparently in America was a very kind of strictured place. So when you break out of it, if somebody's there at the door of your club saying, "Do you want this? This will help you break out of it more for the music," you're just going to do it. So, yeah, I think they were using the drugs merely as a key to open the door.
Now, in your email, I'm going to quote what you wrote. You said the music, the manipulation is so old and so deeply ingrained that elements of this pernicious anti-consciousness agenda are now part of the musical DNA of even the most well-meaning and their conscious musicians, who unknowingly pass it on to both their audience and their students. It's like a virus and can't be cured until it's been accurately diagnosed. Could you talk a little bit more about that and kind of expand on that?
Okay, well, one element of what I'm talking about there is the very scale that Western music has been ruled by for a little over a century now. I'm talking about this thing called equal temperament. Equal temperament is a practice whereby you decide what the actual pitches of your instrument are going to be by taking an octave, which is in pure physics terms, the simplest change of pitch there is. It's a doubling of frequency or a halving of frequency. So the number 1 doesn't change. Multiplying a frequency by 1 doesn't change it, but multiplying a frequency by 2 does change it, and 2 is the simplest number after 1. So an octave is the primary kind of interval as far as a lot of musicians are concerned, and equal temperament divides that octave perfectly, equally into 12 steps. And this is the practice that the West has been using constantly for a century or more. At least it thinks it's been using. Actually, there are far more approximations and even dodgy misapproximations of it going on than people realize. And there are actually pieces of music where people think they're trying to play in that tuning system, but they're actually playing something more beautiful, and people recognize it for that. This is very true inside orchestral brass players, who rarely play in equal temperament unless they are forced to by the other instruments around them. They would much rather play in another system called just intonation, which uses much more simple mathematics to work out a scale. When you use equal temperament, the mathematics that is required to work out those frequencies has to use a number which is the 12th root of 2, which is the number that if you multiplied it by itself 12 times would equal 2, which is about 1.09. It's a very irrational number, and the mind feels it as an irrational number. When a scale is built out of simple numbers like 3 over 2 and 5 over 4, which are simple fractions that anybody with 2 cups with some liquid could demonstrate those fractions quite easily. When you have scales that are built from these numbers, you get a different understanding from music. And just intonation is actually only one example of an alternate tuning system that has been rumbling underneath the surface of Western music for the whole 20th century, and actually more so now in the 21st century. The movement as a whole is known as the Zen harmonicists. Zen as in X-E-N, meaning foreign, meaning actually just not 12-tone equal temperament, the thing that we have been monolithically stuck on all this time. The reason why I find this sound, the use of 12-tone equal temperament, toxic, is because it is an extremely limiting force. Okay, the reason that we use it is so that notes fit together easily and conveniently in a way where they are kind of in tune, kind of not, but they'll do. Okay, it's a bit like playing Tetris. If Tetris has blocks inside it that are all the same size, even though they're different, amounts of them joined together, they're all made from the same size block in the first place, they will tessellate nicely. That is equal temperament visually presented. But other tuning systems would actually build those blocks of different sizes so that they don't tessellate, and they cause what you might call dissonances, what you might call higher consonances than you can get in equal temperament. It gives you, these different tuning systems give you a much, much wider palette of sound and consonance and dissonance that can impart information, both intellectual and emotional and visceral. And for the sake of convenience, and for other reasons that I won't try to dive into here because it would take too long, it's been pushed and pushed for the last century, and underneath the surface there is something with much more capacity to communicate, waiting for its moment to come out into the light and put the thing that we've been using back in the shade where it belongs. Just to finish that thought off, I'll give you the general opinion of 17th century musicians and their tuning systems about equal temperament. They looked at the possibility of equal temperament, and they said, why on earth would you want to flatten out all of these wonderful colours? What a ridiculous thing to do.
Now, a lot of people don't realize or don't think about it often how important not only language but music is to early childhood development
Hmm.
in a human. Could you talk a little bit about that and how it can affect the development of a child?
Well, sure thing. Music is built out of, um, you can't call them sentences, but it is built out of forms that have a degree to, they have a part to them that is similar to rhyming schemes. It's similar to the very first simple constructions you might make with building blocks. Um, and before speech really comes to us, we've already soaked in some of these forms of speech and the way that they might transact in thoughts through the way that we've listened to music and the way music reflects itself and inverts itself and questions itself. Yeah? And to a degree, the kind of music that children love, which is, simple nursery rhyme music, is exactly the right music for them to be teaching them those basic functions inside thought. The trouble comes when they go from nursery rhymes at 3 to Disney songs at 8 to whatever creature Disney people turn into by the time they're 21 and they lose psychic control of them, listening to that at 13. Because the progression from one to the other, while it may contain more adult themes, actually down at the emotional level, the music has barely developed. When you get to, it's something that I've encountered in my teaching a lot. Is teaching, because I've taught a lot of teenagers. I've met a lot of those teenagers, younger brothers and sisters as well. And in my part of the world, a lot of them are crazy about pop music. And pop music, beyond a certain age, because it is so simple in its musical transactions, it's actually reinforcing staying infantile in your thought patterns. And I've seen, because, as a teacher, you end up teaching people for quite a few years at a time, I've seen the development of some of these children, and some of these children really do end up emotionally undeveloped from simply listening to pop music all the time, because nobody in the family, even actually after I sort of suggested that it might be a good thing, nobody has introduced them to any music with any more complexity that challenges them or makes them think or makes them feel in more complex ways. So, one of the toxins I would like to make a hullabaloo about and invite the world to address a little bit more is actually not so much a poison that sort of hurts us directly, but the idea that a lot of modern music is stunting us, both in our intellect and in our concentration and in our emotional literacy inside ourselves.
Right. And, it's when you look at not only the musical composition and, the way it sounds to you, but you look at the lyrics of modern music. From what I've heard, these lyrics are so dumbed down, and it's just the simplest or, most obnoxious or negative, just not unintelligent, not conscious music, definitely, that from most of what I hear nowadays. And I would imagine that the lyrics of the music would have just a profound effect as the actual composition and tones of the music as well, right?
Well, absolutely, but what's going on as far as I can see there is that when they present those lyrics, which if you took the suggestions in them seriously, you might find yourself at a psychic or mental or emotional disadvantage for having taken that advice. When they present that advice to you, they present it across a riff. Okay, I won't even glorify it by calling it a tune, because most of the time it's 3 pitches, and I don't really consider 3 pitches a tune. But the point is that the tune is so basic and so repetitive that it becomes a meme. It becomes a mind virus. Yeah, if it's something that you're simply looking for a moment's entertainment, and you just find this catchy little tune that actually it's the drum beat underneath it that's making it catchy. The tune itself is just hammering itself into your consciousness, and it's a little bomb with the thought of the lyric inside it. And it's the very repetitive nature of it, the thing that anybody with any development in music goes, can't you actually do something with that tune instead of just playing it over and over again? No, the whole point of its repetitiveness is to just bang it into the minds of those people who will be willing to listen to music like that.
Very interesting. Now, I'd like to take a look at some of the effects that music actually has on people. Let's start with some positive effects. I know I've personally experienced healing effects. There's been quite a few times where I have severe stomach problems at times, and I in extreme pain, can't move, and I'll put on the right music, and it just within minutes I begin to feel better, and it's like it has this healing effect on me. What are some of other effects music may have along with healing?
Okay, well, let me try and find the reference to it. But part of what I looked at while I was developing these ideas was the fact that just up the road from me, in Bradford, in Yorkshire, there was a school that was miserably failing. The environment there was not good for the kids, and the kids were just not passing exams and not happy, and all sorts of things going wrong. And they got a headmaster in who insisted on rehabilitating music and dance into everybody's education. And within a year or so, the entire school had turned around and was actually a functioning school again, with happiness and hope and possibilities inside it. So there are elements inside music that can simply give you a handle onto what's going on inside yourself. And sometimes when you feel things inside yourself and you can't put your finger on them properly, yeah, sometimes, as you say, they appear as pains in your body, don't they? Okay? But sometimes if you can actually put your finger on what it is, the emotional state that's going on and what needs to be processed with it, which music can help you be literate with, then you can discharge those energies, you can alter those energies, because you have a somewhat capable personal technology inside yourself to be able to know what's going on. Music can educate you into finer and finer degrees of emotional literacy, and therefore also control and the capacity to see your dynamics inside yourself. This is another one of the reasons why I find pop music and music which is a few minutes long, basically, to be quite damaging when people listen to enormous amounts of it, is that it rarely has the opportunity in terms of time to develop in any way and produce a dynamic. A pop song will have 3 sections to the tops, and they won't develop from one to the other. They'll simply click from one to the other. And as an example to your own mind as to what you can do with your emotional state, what that's saying is, well, you have different emotional states. They come and go. You have no idea how you get from one to the other. They just are. They just come and they just go, and you have no control. Whereas listening to a piece of music which actually has development that takes it from one emotional state to another can actually give you a ride which teaches you what to look for, what to feel inside yourself as you become more emotionally literate, as you become capable of finding a dynamism inside your own mood instead of being either locked in one place or bipolar or whatever other stuck thing you might be suffering.
And there's also the the Mozart effect, where people scored higher on IQ tests after listening to Mozart or other classical music, right?
Yeah, it was actually quite specifically Mozart. There's a strange thing about it in that Mozart had a kind of skill that could work at many levels at once in terms of the symmetry and the beauty inside his music. And without people really understanding how he's doing it, because there are very few people in the world that really understand it, it does actually stand out as having those effects of improving your mathematical skill, your spatial reasoning skill, sometimes even your linguistic skills and your emotional regulation skills. He does actually, with Mozart, have a bit of a sharp point on the graph. There are other composers around that have some of that effect, but particularly or some of his late music is very powerful at doing that. And it just occurred to me a few years ago that when I was first really looking into, I already understood some of these effects, but I'd never seen anybody else talk about them, and that's where I first saw it, was people talking about the Mozart effect. It made me think, if that is the case, that some composers can have such a pronounced effect, perhaps there are other composers that can have a pronounced effect in the opposite direction too. But yeah, the part of the Mozart effect that interests me most actually is, I should put this in two parts. The first part of it that interests me most is the fact that as a piano teacher, I've been able to use it as a justification for charging parents to teach their children music, which otherwise they would think of as a somewhat unimportant skill in their lives. But when they learn that it's something that actually puts your maths grades up, suddenly it has a kind of value to it. So that's one aspect of the Mozart effect. But the one that interests me more so is its capacity to teach a human being to be able to balance themselves, which, from my experience, is the very opposite of what quite a lot of modern and especially popular music is doing to people. It's teaching people how to lose the balance in themselves, or to unlearn how to even keep the balance in themselves.
Very interesting. Do you think that music could possibly have the power to affect us biologically or heal us in a way?
I'm fairly certain of the fact. I personally have a view of what the body is and how the body functions that is quite holographic. So I don't make much distinction between the physical manifestation of problems or healings in the body and the energy field that might come from holding certain emotions or attitudes. Yeah, to me, they are the chicken and the egg, really. So as far as I'm concerned, music is an interface into that. It's a way of altering the psyche on one level, and if you do it successfully enough and completely enough, that altering on that one level can then go out like a chain of events to alter other levels of your being.
Now let's talk about some of the negative effects music might have. I know for me, whenever I hear some of the modern music that I'm not too fond of, it'll put me in a bad mood, and I just don't want to be around it. I don't want to hear it. It's unpleasant for me, even though for some reason most of the people around me are enjoying it. I don't get the same effect for some reason. But talk about some negative effects that music can have.
It's an interesting thing you've brought up there. You're talking about your own experiences of, feeling a piece of music and going, about it, while everybody else is going, what's your problem? What's your problem? Yeah. I'd like to ask you a pointed question about that. What do you think it is inside that piece of music that the most deepest level you can conceive it? What was it that offended you about it?
Well, for me, I'm used to more complex music. The simple, repetitive music that's just been kind of worn out over the past few decades. It's just, it sounds all the same to me, and it doesn't do anything for me on a spiritual level, on an intellectual level, and I don't get any emotional response from it.
Okay, so no, your first word you chose was spiritual, though. Okay, you said it doesn't give you something, and then on a spiritual level. What is missing from that music?
I'm sorry, what was that?
So, if you're saying there was something missing from it, and then you're immediately talking about spiritual things, what is really missing from that music? Put the nail on the head. What is that word?
Right.
It's soulless, isn't it? That music is soulless, yeah?
Right.
And I'm sorry to sort of be so polarizing, but the reason why so many people don't notice it is, guess what? They don't have much soul. That's why they don't notice. It's only people who've actually developed some soul, some sensitivity in their soul, that would actually look at this music and go, that's actually belittling me in some way. Yeah?
Right. Yes, makes sense.
This is why we don't just go, oh, that's a bit boring, no, I can't be bothered with that, I think I'll leave. You don't feel that, do you? You think, oh, God, no. Yeah? You get to a point where you are almost physically offended by the music, okay?
Right.
Because, you wouldn't get that offended if it wasn't actually assaulting you in some way, would you?
Yeah, I would have to think not. No.
That's what it's doing. It's giving you an influence, which is saying return to automaton. Yeah?
Can you repeat what you just said? It's keeping you under influence and what?
It's giving you an influence that's saying return to being an automaton. Listen to the
yes.
inside this thought form, behave with that simplicity. And, when you look across the crowd at the people enjoying it, you go, oh, God, they're complying. And that's upsetting, isn't it? To somebody with soul, you look at it and go, I wish I could help these people, but get the hell out of here.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Yeah, it's very odd to me the type of music that most people are enjoying now. It has a complete opposite effect on me and a few other people that I know.
I mean, one element of this is that it's been going on for quite a few decades now that commercial music, especially, has had all of the subtleties that. Well, when you play an instrument live and you play an acoustic instrument, there are so many little imperfections inside what you do, inside the tone, inside the timing, inside the tuning, inside the creaking of the stool that you sat on, all sorts of different things, especially when musicians play together, the timing issues going on between the two musicians. Some of it will be conscious for them. Some of it will be coming straight from their body. Some of it will be coming from somewhere else inside them as well. You could call that the unconscious. You could call it the soul. But sometimes, and we've all heard it, there's a group of musicians that comes together somewhere and they all click together on that level. And it just creates a blessed piece of music. I presume you've witnessed one of those pieces of music sometime in your life. Yeah?
Oh, definitely. Being in a band, I experience it firsthand where you get into this kind of this mode where you're syncing so well with the other members of the band, and it's like it's coming from somewhere else. It's like you're just going with it and it's flowing through you. I've definitely experienced that.
Well,
yes.
That thing that you're experiencing now, consider the fact that if you could record that very thing separately on a separate track inside a recording studio, that would be the thing that the recording engineer would go, oh, thanks, mate, you've made that really convenient, and then just delete it immediately.
Right.
Yeah, so that all the drumming was absolutely square on the beat, and all the guitars were absolutely with the drums, and all the pitches were absolutely perfectly on their equally tempered spots. All of this is removed for this weird false sense of perfection, which is actually a sense of perfection more akin to a computer than it is a human being.
Right.
So, the more of this subtlety is removed from a piece of music, the more it is, to some degree, even if it's just a gentle suggestion of an influence, it is dehumanizing at some level. Yeah. So part of what I'm trying to set fire in people's minds is the idea that we've all been too lenient on music, on musicians, on people who just use music and play music in certain places where we have to go. We've been too lenient on just saying, oh, it's just music. It won't really hurt me. I'll just put up with it for 10 minutes, whatever it is. And it's a dehumanizing effect. I don't want people to panic about it or to get paranoid about it, but I want people to get to realize that it's more of a subtle and continuous influence than most people would grant it. And that if you want to be a person that has a functioning higher conscious, an emotional balance that can bring you to that place, an understanding of your place in the world as actually somebody who can move forward and lead rather than be a victim, you have to be careful about your diet of music, because your diet of music could actually introduce emotional states that would completely throw you from those goals. And sometimes we have just sort of habitual tastes. Sometimes we have moments where we're just not conscious about it and we just put up with it because we're with somebody else playing it. Sometimes we have cravings that are actually to do with the lower parts of our body that just want to listen to certain kinds of music. Yeah. If we are trying to be more conscious beings, we have to treat those cravings a little bit like somebody trying to come out of a drug addiction by using consciousness and meditation and healing techniques and things. The body still once in a while goes, oh, it'd be nice to have some skag tonight, wouldn't it? It'd be really nice. And you have to go, well, yeah, body, okay, I recognize that feeling in you, but I don't have to follow you at all, yeah? I think a lot of Western people actually suffer from a little bit of that going on in their music listening habits, that they are, without them realizing it, bringing themselves down to some degree, whether it be a loss of intellectual capacity or a downing of mood or a dropping of energy. I'm putting myself out into the world to ask people to become more conscious of this, because I think, well, I know that we're in an age of revealing right now, aren't we? There's things being revealed every single day of our lives, and one of those things that I would like more revealed is the West's unconscious habitual use of music.
Yes, I think that's extremely important. I think a lot more people need to kind of open up their eyes to the detrimental effects of some of the modern music that's out there right now. And I mean, if you look at the artists behind it and some of the things that are coming to light right now with, supposed satanic practices and all these things that are coming to light, it makes it even more, of a priority to try and change things around. And it makes me sad for music because, growing up, I used to listen to a lot more different types of music than I do now, because it's harder for me to find good music or musical artists now. And it makes me worry about the future of what our music industry and everything is going to be going, because it seems that each year that passes, it keeps degrading in quality. And I think we need a new era of musicians.
Well, one of the things that I saw happening in terms of the degradation of music, you talk about not being able to find that music nowadays, yeah? Right. It's just a needle in a haystack, yeah? That's because, as far as I can see, that sometime in the past 30 years, the technology for making music has, making it to the point where it is a streamable product or a CD or whatever it might be. Yeah, the technology for doing that has come down in price and been systematized so well that the average musician can now afford to do that for themselves. So you would think that would actually provide a sort of great degree of freedom, where people have stepped away from the record companies and they can suddenly do what they want. And they've got the capacity to work on it by themselves and publish it by themselves. But what I find is that the very nature of the way that they are doing that music, the way they are producing that music, it's through machines And a lot of the time through machines where they are really not interacting with those machines in much of a complex and subtle way. You know, I have a simple way of detecting whether somebody is really a musician or not, or whether they're just a DJ. Okay, now I'm not saying that a DJ is something worse than a musician. I'm just saying there is a line somewhere, and that line for me is that if you are on stage playing music and somebody comes back round behind you with a rubber mallet and conks you on the back of the head, and it takes people more than 3 seconds to notice that somebody has knocked you out, you weren't actually being a musician, you were being a DJ. Because music is something that, even though we're so used to records and CDs and MP3s, it is an immediate thing. Yeah? And if a moment has passed and you were unconscious and out of control in that moment, that should sound in music. That's what real music is. That's what music that's communicating some heart and some soul. It would be unmissable, wouldn't it?
Right.
So I find that many, many people have sort of taken the bait of going, right, I can be creative now. And then what they're doing is essentially colouring in a book that somebody has handed them. By the way that they are...
You broke up there for a couple of minutes.
I find that people who have this technology are using it like people who are just colouring in a book that somebody else drew the drawings in. Yeah? You know, for instance, one of the things I notice from many people is that when they first pick up a digital audio workstation like Ableton Live or something like that, yeah? It will actually take them months before they even notice that they can change the tempo controller and the time signature controller. You know, I've known people that have never actually moved the time signature controller on their digital audio workstation since they installed it 5 years ago. It's been in 4.4 that whole time. And that's the machine's decision. It's never been your nervous system's decision in that moment. So this is what these machines are doing to us, is they are sort of feeding us in and going, how would you like to interact with our matrix today? Not, what can I do to try and record the majesty and the beauty that's going to come through your soul today?
Yeah, that's a very good way to look at it. Definitely. Now, for the last few minutes that we have, let's talk about how people can consume or even create a healthy music diet.
Okay. Well, I wrote a course recently. It's not quite ready to present yet because my website is not ready to actually go online yet, but I've been writing a course called Poisonous Music, how to spot it and how to neutralize it for your own benefit and the good of all. And it's an attempt to, it's not just a book, it's a set of exercises, a complex and long set of exercises that will take you 2 or 3 months at least to complete. But it's an attempt to, first of all, remove your bigotries around what kind of music you might just immediately go, nah, not interested about within 3 seconds of listening to it. Yeah, because many people get stuck in certain music ruts because they actually get addicted to the little energetic hit that they get from that kind of music. Okay? A very, very obvious example of this is people who listen to high-energy dance music all day, and the fact that if you try and play them something really calm and slow and lyrical at the wrong time, they won't give it 3 seconds. It's just like, where's my jolt? Where's my jolt? Yeah? So they immediately dismiss it. And the opposite can be true as well. People who use music purely to soothe themselves, they'll hear 3 bass drum beats and switch the thing off. Okay? So there are common, easy, simple to spot bigotries going on in a lot of people, but they're not easy to actually switch off. What you have to do is to realize that there is something inside yourself, a fragment of your own personality, that is behaving a little like an addict might demand a certain drug to do a certain thing, okay? So somebody might get addicted to a barbiturate drug, for instance, because they have an overstressed nervous system and want to just feel numb because it's peaceful. Yeah? There are many, many different emotional hits that you can just get used to topping yourself up with. I mean, for instance, how many people wake up and within 10 minutes of being wide awake, within 10 minutes of waking up, they are wide awake, and yet they'll still just have a cup of coffee with sugar in it, for good measure. Yeah? It just becomes a habit. And because they become habits, they become crutches. They become things that when you don't provide for them inside your psyche, they will behave like petulant children. And they'll go, nah, I don't want that, nah. Okay? And you'll hear that and you'll feel that and you'll behave like that, even though there's another part of you going, I'm actually curious. But you're already bored. Okay? So it's important to realize the possibility that you could have semi-subconscious programs going on in you that prevent you from even giving certain forms of music enough time for you to notice the whole realm that they're trying to speak to you in, okay? There are whole bits of music that have no interest in physically exciting you and making you want to thrash your feet on the floor. But that doesn't make them any less pieces of music. And obviously the opposite is true as well, and in many other, polar opposites like that. It's the first thing you can do is to actually spot that thing inside yourself, is to realize where your own almost instantaneous emotional bigotries can show themselves, okay? I'm not trying to put anybody down by using the word bigotry, I'm just trying to explain it as a way of it being a snap decision that you're not even quite aware of what the emotional content of it was. You just go, no. Yeah? Lots of people have that, and to simply become aware of it is a first step. A second step is to realize that if you provide for this fragment in you that's expecting this jolt from music, from whatever it is, then it calms down and becomes your friend, and you can recognize it and you can talk to it, and further you can actually listen to some other kind of music afterwards and not get the same immediate dismissal sense from your emotional state. Okay? From that point, you can begin to actually notice what music can do for you, rather than this monotone, does it do this particular X thing for me? Because that's my yes or no as to whether I listen to it. Yeah? Once you've stepped off that need for that particular style of music, you'll find simply that, it might have been years since you've actually not had that, and that your mind and your emotional literacy has thoroughly matured in the meanwhile, and you are actually quite hungry for different emotional and intellectual experiences from a piece of music.
Very good. Now, could you recommend any modern musical artist that produces, good, positive, conscious music?
Well, that's a very tricky thing, because I could inject my own tastes and things into that as to what I think
Sure.
of conscious music and what isn't conscious music. I would prefer to do something slightly other than that, and that is to suggest to people that there is an enormous difference between listening to music that has been recorded into digital systems and then filtered through them and then put on an MP3, and then you're listening to it through the internet and through a pair of headphones or even earbuds. Okay? The number of times that the sound has been in some way altered through that process is enough to make whatever was there originally almost disappear. Okay? What I would suggest is that if you want healthiness, if you want benefit from music in a way that actually feeds your soul and your emotional fluidity and your intellect, I would go and find some music that is acoustic, that is played to a small enough audience that nobody even has to have any amplification. So, modern folk gigs, sometimes, they'll be playing a mandolin and a fiddle, and a mandolin and a fiddle won't really carry very far, so they'll put it through an enormous PA to allow 400 people to listen to it, and that's immediately flattened the experience to some degree. I would say to people, no, don't even go out looking for recordings of some famous composer who's going to give you a spiritual experience. I say, get down the pub, go and find a local musician who's good, who sets you on edge or delights you in some way, and then go and sit in the front row and really, really take in what they're doing. And you will find that the difference between, being on your own listening to an MP3 through a little electronic device and actually having a human with some degree of musical mastery in front of you is enormous. I want people to try and remember that on a regular basis, so that when they are simply, looking for that emotional hit and they're grubbing through lots and lots of very low quality recordings for it, I want them to realize that they're not looking in the right place.
Right. Very good. Well, Simon, thank you so much for coming on tonight. You said your website is still in development?
My website is still in development. If anybody wants to get in contact with me, I've got pages on YouTube, I've got pages on minds.com, and I've got pages on BitChute. You just look up The Conscious Music School. And
that's The Conscious Music School, right?
The Conscious Music School, all one word, yeah. Okay, and if anybody wants to really help me along, then I have a GoFundMe page where people who present me with enough donations will actually get some of the courses that I intend to sell on the website as soon as it is up. So if I could just give you the address of that, that's gofundme.com/f/ and then a sentence with all the words having hyphens between them. Help build the Conscious Music School website.
Simon, you were breaking up when you said that. Could you repeat that website? And I'll leave the link in the description so they can just click that.
Yeah, I'll just say it one more time. GoFundMe.com/f/help build the Conscious Music School website. And all that last phrase has hyphens between the words.
Okay, well, you just go ahead and email me that so I can put that in the description for the audience, because you were still breaking up, but that's okay. They'll get the link there in the description. Simon, thank you again so much for coming on. Very important information. Everyone should share this and just have some conscious thought about the music you're listening to and how it's affecting you. It's very fascinating stuff. I'd love to have you back on in the future, too.
I'd love to come back in the future, too. Thank you very much.